Hey guys, so in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you 5 list related tips and tricks you can use in Python. So let's begin. I will make sure to add timestamps in the video description below so you can just hop between the sections of the video. So I'm going to create the first file here called isinstance.py. So let's just write a simple function. I'm going to be calling this print last, and I'm going to be passing a list here. And what this function is going to do is just basically output the last element of the list. So let's see here, let's call this function with something. So print last, and let's pass in a list here, apple, banana, and let's just run this to see if it works. And yeah, it outputs banana, so it works. So now let's assume that we are using this function, and for some reason we are not calling it with a list, but let's say a string here. So apple. Well, it's still going to work because this expression does make sense in case of strings, but let's just say that for some reason we are passing in like something like 50, so a number here, and of course it's going to be raising an error here. So what can we do here? So something that we can do is check the type of the parameter that we are passing in. So what I can do is just make sure that the type of this parameter is a list, because we know that the function makes sense to be called with a list. So let's say else raise some exception, and let's say please give me a list. And now if we run the code, it's going to be raising the exception. So we basically just caught this error that we are trying to use the function with something that it should not be used with. So let's just go with the list again. So apple, banana, and yeah, it outputs banana. And let's just, for example, see what happens if we are not using it with a list but a tuple. So it should work because it makes sense, because a tuple has a last element, but still it won't work because it is not a list. So what we could do is, check for the type again. So maybe if it's a tuple, then still do this business here. So let's do that. So it works again, but there are other kinds of stuff here. So like if we wanted to make it work with strings, then we would have to do another elif, and then I don't know, there are a couple other collections here that can work and should work. So what we can do actually is not check for the type, but use something other. So I'm going to update this, and it's called isinstance. So what we can do here is just pass in the object, which is going to be my list, and check if it's a list. So let's just see if it still works. So run the code here, and it still works. So, but we still didn't solve the problem that we would have to type all of these other type of. So let's just check for the tuple and for string and stuff like that. So we still didn't solve the issue, but what we can do actually is use something called collections ABC. So it's a built-in library. Let's see, from collections.abc, and ABC stands for abstract, import sequence. So what we can do is just check if the mylist is an instance of a sequence here, and then just delete this code, and it should be working. So let's see if it works with a list here. So it does work, and let's see if it works with a tuple here. So let's make this a tuple, and see if it works. And yeah, so it works. So it's something that's really handy because you don't have to think about all the scenarios, what kind of lists are there, and check for all of those. But you can just use the sequence here, and there are other kinds of stuff here. So not just sequence, but for example mapping or mutable mapping, mutable sequence. These are all really useful stuff here. So make sure you take a look at them and improve yourself and your code, and not just check for the type like I did in the first case when I created this function here. So that's the tip number 1. So let's just go for tip number 2, and it's going to be a much easier one, and I'm going to call this enumerate.py. So a few weeks back I was doing a bunch of these this kind of coding competitions, and on codeforces.com, and for lots of exercises in lots of exercises I had to use lists, and basically those exercises weren't really created for Python, but I use Python anyway, and I had to, for a whole lot of cases, I had to know the location of an element, like the index of an element here. So let's just create a list here and fill it up with some values. Banana, plums, what else? Orange. So we have some fruits here. Let's call this fruits. And let's just say that, for example, you need the indexes for. So let's say you want the index for apple, and let's just create a for loop here. So for fruit in fruits, and we would want to print the index and the fruit, for example. So what we can do here is just print let's say index and fruit, and what we can do is just create an index here and make the value of that index 0, and then in here we can increment that value by 1. So it kind of works, but it's like not really, it doesn't look good. So in other programming languages the incrementation of this index is just much simpler, but in Python it just does not look good. And but if you still want to know the index, there's a solution for that, and we have this function, or it's a wrapper function for our sequence here. And what we can do is just type enumerate, make sure I type that right, and then what we can do here is just type index here, and it should work. So let's run the code. Yes, so it outputs the same as the last before. So just let's see what this enumerate is. It's going to be basically returning not only the fruit in each iteration, but the index as well. So if you, oh sorry, I'm just going to delete this code here and just show you guys it still works. So this is a much simpler and much nicer to look at way to make sure that we are keeping up with the index of the list. Where are we in the list? So if you need to do that, guys, use enumerate here. So this was tip number 2. So let's just go for tip number 3, and it's going to be called zip. So I'm just going to copy this here, and let's just create another list here. So fill it up with some values. Oh, I forgot to add the .py extension here, so let's just do that. So let's fill this up with some values. Yellow, purple, and orange. So let's just say I want to create a program and just output the name of the fruit here and the color of the fruit. So what I can do is just basically one solution would be to use an index, so in fruits, and we can now use the enumerate because we have took a look at that in the tip number 2 before. So what we can do is just, let's say, print the fruit and print has color, and then print from colors, pass in the index here, so it should work. And yeah, apple has color red, banana has color yellow, so it works. And let's just delete these. So it works, but it's not really really good looking solution. So what we really want to do here is iterate over the 2 lists at the same time, and we have a solution for that, and it's called zip. So same as with enumerate, we have to type zip here, and then we have to type in the 2 lists that we want to basically iterate all together. So what we need to do here is just pass in these 2 lists, and in this case the first variable here is going to be fruit, because the first list that I passed in is the fruits, and then the second variable is going to be called color. And let's just run the code, and just like that we managed to iterate over the 2 lists at the same time. So use zip for this if you need to. And let's see tip number 4, and I'm going to be calling this comprehensions. So let's say that we have this here. Oh, and of course I forgot to add the .py extension. So we have a list here, and let's just create a few more elements in here. So we have a list here filled with a bunch of fruits. Let's just say that this is a fruit basket here, and what we want to do is just output if something is an apple or not an apple, and we want to save that in a list, not just output it but save it in a list. So let's say call that list apple, not apple, I don't know. So one thing we can do is just loop over the fruit basket, and for each fruit, in fruit basket, for each fruit we check if it's an apple. So let's say fruit equals apple, then we append to this list apple, and else we append not an apple, and let's just output this fruit apple not apple list here. So run, and as you can see here it works, but it's not really pleasant to look at, let's say that, and it takes up 5 lines of code. It should be so much smaller because it's such an easy thing that we are doing here. So what we can do is just, there's this thing called list comprehensions, and what we can do is just in a line of code we can define how the list should be built up from another list or some iterable object. So what we can do is just basically say here for fruit in fruit basket, and we want to define what to do with it, and basically we have to do that before in here. So let's just type in fruit and see how it looks like. So in this case these 2 lists are going to be the same, so it outputs the same list as here. So what we want to do is check if the fruit is an apple or not. So what we can basically do here is if fruit equals apple, then apple, or not then but just apple, I guess. Oh no, it should be like apple if fruit equals apple, else not apple. And yeah, it works this way. So let's just see another example here, because this might be a bit confusing. So let's just, well, I'm not going to delete all this, but just this line and create another one here. So let's say we have some numbers here in a list. So 11, 54, 60, 30, and we want to create another list which contains all of these values, but not in as an integer, but as a string. So let's call that number string. And so let's work from here. So what we want is the numbers to become strings. So we're going to be typing number and for number in numbers. So basically this expression is just, you know, the same old. So if you were to iterate over lists, so for number in numbers, you would type something like this, and that goes here. And before that is basically just define what we want to do with this, with the variable here. So in this case we want to convert it to a string. So let's just output this. So yeah, we can see that all of these are converted to strings. I'm just going to print the original list here so we can see the difference. So yeah, it converts all the numbers here to strings and creates a new list with that. So that's list comprehensions. Okay, so the fifth one is going to be really easy, and I'm just going to call this join.py, and let's just copy this list from before. And what we want to do is just basically convert this list to a string and then just output that string. So what we could do is, let's just say fruit basket str and make that equal to a null string or an empty string, and then, you know, iterate over the list, and for every element we want to, you know, add the value to the string before and then just output the string. So let's see how that looks. Yeah, it's looking something like that. Maybe separate that with a space here, so like this. Yeah, so it looks okay, but there's a much shorter solution than this. So what we can do is just basically use something called join here, and actually the join is a function for a string, and the string is going to be the space because that's our separator that we want to use. And what we can just do here is call join and pass in the list that we have before, and it works like this. So this was just a really simple one. So I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you got something useful out of it. And if you did, please subscribe to the channel, make sure to like the video, and stay safe. Thanks for watching. Bye.